Hey everyone, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing another unsolved mystery video, so make sure to give this one a thumbs up if you love these and want to see more, and don't forget to comment down below, let me know any cases that you would like to see me cover in future videos, and let's get into it. Also, before we get started, I just want to mention, if my eyes get really red and raw throughout this, it's because I am so tired, and being tired and having these really bright lights in front of you, it just sears your eyes and it's not a good combo. I remember last time my eyes were this red in one of my mystery series. Everyone was like, are you okay? Have you been crying? Are you high? And I was like... So in today's video we are going to be covering the Dyatlov Pass incident, which I already know that 90% of the names in this case I am going to absolutely butcher because they're all Russian and my pronunciation of English words is not the best, so Russian I'm going to struggle. On February 2nd in 1959, a group of 9 hikers who were led by Igor Dyatlov mysteriously died while hiking the Ural Mountains in west central Russia. So on the 5th of January in 1959, 10 hikers, 2 women and 8 men were going to go on a 14-day expedition on this hike to Torton, which was something like a 1,200 meter hike. The route that they were taking at that specific time was considered a category 3, which is the highest category, basically meaning the hike was super difficult. All of the hikers were in their mid-20s, so they were all pretty young except for one guy, Semyor, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the last name, who was in his late 30s. And all of them were students or graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, and they were all very experienced in hiking and skiing and all of that kind of stuff. So this hike, journey, expedition was very well documented. They had cameras, took heaps of photos, and they had a diary entry as well, which was, they wrote in that a lot, so there's a lot of information from this diary entry. And before the hike, the weather conditions were kind of really shitty, but they were all really excited to go on this hike anyway, just judging by the diary. I found a website that actually has the diary entries written down on it, but it's all in Russian, so I do have Google Chrome, which has this feature that translates an entire page for you, but it's kind of shitty, to be honest, but I will link it down below anyway, so hopefully maybe if any of you speak Russian you can get a little bit more out of it than I can, or if you have any more better websites that you can translate it from than Google Chrome, be my guest. I would love for you to do that. So from what I could gather and could read from this diary entry, I know I said the weather conditions were shitty, but they were just kind of shitty in general at that time, but for that time of year they were pretty good conditions, if that makes sense. So it's shitty, but for that time of year it's not as shitty as it could have been. It was pretty much exactly what they had expected, if not a little bit better, and they also mentioned that they figured out how they could walk and conserve energy. They had this little plan which they figured out to help them on their expedition. Toward the end, the weather seemed to get progressively worse. They did talk about high wind speeds quite often, but once again it was pretty good for that time of year. Anyway, on the 25th of January, the group arrived in Ivdel, which was a city in the northern province of Sverdlovsk Oblast. From there, they caught a truck to Vizhay, which was the last inhabited settlement to the north, and from there, that is where they were going to begin their hike. On the 27th of January is when they actually set out to begin their hike, but one of their members, Yuri Yudin, actually became sick and had to stay in Vizhay, which was kind of a bummer at the time, but it ended up being a blessing in disguise for him because he was the only person out of the group of 10 who survived. So the group ended up beginning their hike officially on the 1st of February, and they started pretty late that day. I think it might have been around 3 p.m. or something like that, and they didn't get very far. They ended up only hiking about 4 kilometers before they had to stop and set up camp on a slope on Kolat Syakhl, which was 16 kilometers from their final destination of Mount Otorten. The group had dinner at about 6 to 7 p.m. and they ate inside their tent. There were only 2 people missing who were outside, probably like relieving themselves or something, and that was Nikolai and Semyon. And this was the last known movements of the group. And it all gets pretty weird from here. When nobody heard from the group, no one was really worried. Igor told the institute he would contact them on the 12th when they got back to Vizhay, but he didn't, and no one was really worried because he also told Yuri that he was planning on taking a little bit longer, and generally on these types of expeditions they do take longer. It's not out of the ordinary for them to contact and get back later than they had originally planned. The relatives of the hikers were of course a little bit less relaxed and wanted to know what was happening, and they persistently demanded a rescue mission until the head of the institute finally sent one out, and it was made up of students from the institute as well as teachers. It wasn't until the 20th that the police and the army became involved, and they utilized helicopters and planes on their rescue efforts. 6 days after the official search began, on the 26th of February, one of the students in the rescue mission found the tent. It was badly damaged and they found it on the Kolat the slope that they were on. The tent was half torn down. It also looked like it had been cut from the inside out so that they could kind of escape. It also had all of their belongings in there, like shoes, socks, clothes, pretty much everything. It was missing the camera of Semyon, which was a little bit strange because why would you take your camera out of everything and leave all of your clothes behind in these really like below freezing temperatures? There were also around the camp about 8 or 9 sets of footprints, which shows that there was no one else around the camp besides the group, and these footprints also showed us that no one was running. They were pretty relaxed footsteps, like people were just walking, no one was fleeing from the tent. The footprints also suggest that all of the people who had been walking were wearing no shoes. They either had one shoe on, they were barefoot, or they were just wearing socks. But unfortunately the footprints could only be followed for 500 meters towards the forest before it was covered with snow. At the edge of the forest, which was about 1 kilometer from where the tent was set up, under an old cedar tree, they found a fire, an old fire which had been put out, and they found the 2 bodies of Yuri Dovashenko and Yuri Krivoshenko. Something that seems kind of sketchy about the bodies is that when they were found, they were literally naked, all except for their underwear and their socks. And I looked a little bit into this because I was like, what the hell? And it actually could possibly be this thing which is called paradoxal undressing, which happens in about 25% of cases of hypothermia victims, where the hypothalamus, I believe it is, doesn't work properly, and so they feel their temperature actually rising and feel like they're getting hotter when actually their temperature is dropping. So it could be a case of that, and maybe they undress because of that. I just thought I would throw that out there. I'm not really sure, but I don't want you guys to think it's too weird, just in case it's not. But another thing that was really sketchy about these bodies is that the old cedar tree which they were underneath, all of the branches up for about 5 meters had all been broken as if someone was trying to climb it. And on top of that, the hands of the 2 men's body that were found were like completely just like almost pulp. They were completely shredded. So it kind of seems like maybe they were frantically trying to climb the tree for whatever reason. Maybe they were trying to see the campsite, maybe there was an immediate threat that they were trying to get away from. Either way, it is clear that these guys tried to climb the tree and absolutely shredded their hands while doing so. The branches also had like skin from their hands embedded into it. The bodies of the 2 men also had livor mortis at the front of their bodies, which, if you don't know what livor mortis is, it's basically where the heart can't push blood around the body anymore because it isn't working, and the blood all pools in wherever is having contact with the ground. So if they had the blood pooled at the front of their body, they were obviously facing down when they died, so all of the blood pooled there. But the weird thing about this is they were turned on their side, which means that somebody had obviously moved the bodies after livor mortis had already occurred. The next day, on the 27th of February, they found 2 more bodies on the search. They found Igor Dyatlov, who was the leader of the group. He's also why this whole place, and this incident is called the Dyatlov Pass and the Dyatlov Pass incident. So he was found 300 meters from the cedar tree. The two men were found out the day before, and they also found the body of Zenaida, who was 630 meters from the cedar tree, making her 330 meters away from Igor. 6 days later, on the 5th of March, they found the body of Rustem Slobodin, and he was found in around the same area that Igor was found, and he was 480 meters from the cedar tree. And these three bodies all looked like they were trying to get back to the tent or the campsite. None of these three bodies had any injuries except for Slobodin, who had a cracked skull, but it didn't seem like this was a fatal injury or what caused him to die. It seemed as though all of them had died of hypothermia. Finally, after these 5 bodies were found, a legal inquest began. And it wasn't until a whole 2 months later, on the 5th of May, that the remaining 4 bodies were found. Because it had taken so long to find these bodies, they were all covered by 4 meters of snow, which made it a lot more difficult to find them. But they were found in a ravine which was 75 meters further into the forest. It also looked like they had made a little snow den, and also put branches in there to try and keep themselves warm and preserve themselves. It seemed like these 4 definitely survived a lot longer than the 5 bodies that were found previously, especially because they had taken clothes from the people that were already deceased to try and keep themselves warm and keep themselves alive. They used the pants of one of the guys to wrap around their feet. They also took a fake fur coat from one of the dead bodies. So 3 of these 4 bodies that were found had died from fatal injuries, and only 1 of them had died from hypothermia. Nikolai had major skull damage, and Lyudmila and Semyon both had major fractures to their chest. None of these people had external wounds or injuries, so it seems as though this was caused by a massive amount of pressure. One of the doctors actually compared it to the pressure that you would have in a car crash. Okay, now this is the weirdest part of the entire case to me. Lyudmila was missing her tongue and her eyeballs, and the eyeballs I think was explained as part of the decomposition process, but the tongue was not explained as part of the decomposition process in the autopsy. There is no explanation to this day as to why her tongue was missing, and I just find that so weird, especially because no one else, out of all 9 hikers, she was the only person missing her tongue and her eyeballs. Like, all of the other injuries and all of the other deaths can be explained, but the fact that her tongue was missing just gets me. It is so bizarre, and all of the theories, none of them explain why her tongue could be missing. Another few sketchy facts to me is the 4 people that were found who had built the den, none of their bodies were actually found inside the den. They were all found around the den, and the clothes of the 2 guys that were first found under the cedar tree, their clothes were actually radioactive. In the end, due to a lack of a guilty party, the case was closed and archived. And the weird thing is, finally in like the 90s, when the files were released, there was a bunch of missing files, which I mean I found weird at first, but apparently that's like not uncommon for the Soviet to actually conceal or have missing documents. But it was determined that they died from a bunch of mistakes that Igor Dyatlov had made. He left too late, they said, and he set up camp in the wrong place, and everyone ended up dying of natural causes. 6 of the bodies died from hypothermia, and then 3 of the bodies died from pressure. Okay, so that is everything. That is all of the information, and now it's time for the fun part. We're gonna get into the theories. So the first theory I want to get out of the way because I don't believe this one, and that is that this was caused by a yeti or a snowman. I personally don't believe in yetis or snowmen, but this theory basically came about because, as I said, this was a really well documented trip expedition, and there was a heap of photos, and one of the photos, which I will show you guys, shows a mysterious figure kind of coming out of the woods. But look, honestly, I feel like this could have been one of the other hikers. Another theory which connects to this photo is that this was one of the Mansi people who were the indigenous people of the area. And basically there is a theory that while the Mansi people were out on a hunt, they ended up killing the 9 hikers. So as I mentioned, the Mansi people were the indigenous people of the area, and they often went for hunts around the area where the group had camped on that slope. There was a Mansi chum, and a chum is like their campground, and that was set up not too far northwest of where the Dyatlov group had set up their own camp. The Mansi people not only had the skills to hunt and track them down, but they also had the skills to kill them, and this could definitely explain the photo that Nikolai took on his camera, because that could be one of the hunters. So the Mansi people also had a bunch of holy grounds around this area in the Ural Mountains. It's possible that they came, tracked them down, and they were like, we don't want you to be here, this is our hunting ground. And either they said that, or they were like, we don't want you here, this is where our holy places are, there are holy places near here, you need to leave. And then the hikers from the Dyatlov group were like, no, like, we've set up camp here, we're not leaving, we can't leave. And then they got into a bit of a scuffle, and the hunters ended up killing the hikers. It's also possible that the Mansi people were on hallucinogenic mushrooms, because they did often take them before a hunt to get in the hunting mood, I read up. So maybe this caused them to kill them or act aggressively towards the group. Honestly, I think the whole theory with the Mansi people is completely far-fetched and unrealistic, because one, there was no signs of any fighting or any injuries on the hikers, and on top of that, it was proven that none of the sacred places of the Mansi people were anywhere near where the Dyatlov group had set up camp. Also, there hadn't been a crime committed in the area for 30 years, so I definitely don't believe this one, but I thought it was worth mentioning. So the next theory is to do with aliens and UFOs. I know you guys were expecting it. I was too. When I was reading through this, I was like, I know someone is gonna say this has to do with aliens because there's no marks, but they're dead, and it's a really weird scene. And what is a conspiracy theory video without an alien conspiracy theory? So it was proven that another hiking group had seen like some weird orbs and some weird lights in the sky, and there was actually a few other witnesses who had also said that in the area they had also seen these weird orbs and weird lights in the sky. And this would explain the radiation, it would also explain the missing tongue, but this kind of connects in to the military theory, and the military theory is why people could have been seeing these orbs and these lights, not because it was aliens, but because the military were doing tests in this area at this time. The military, it turns out, were testing parachute mines in the area that the hikers were. But the problem with both of these theories having anything to do with the cause of death is that it wouldn't make sense that there was only radioactivity found on the clothes of two men of whom both worked with radioactivity, so it was completely normal that they had radioactivity on their clothes and that no one else did. And if it was either aliens or it was the military, there would be radioactiveness everywhere. But basically the theory goes, I'm going to tell you anyway, that they were testing parachute mines, they accidentally killed the hikers, and then they kind of had to set it up to look like they didn't kill the hikers. There was also the tent, and it didn't look like it had been set up properly, which I don't see anything wrong with it, but apparently some people said it didn't look like it had been set up properly, and a few experienced hikers would have known how to set up a tent properly, but the military staging the crime scene didn't do it well enough. This would explain why there was a few little bits here and there that were missing in the documents that were released, but as I said, the Soviet Union was very secretive, and this was not uncommon for them to withhold information. Another theory to do with the military, I don't know if it's the military so much, but this is to do with the KGB. This theory suggests that 3 of the hikers, Semyon, Alexander, and Yuri, were all secretly KGB agents. And the KGB, by the way, is basically like the largest secretive spy organization and they spied on basically everyone's life in the Soviet Union. So apparently these guys were sent to deliver fake radioactive stuff to the CIA, and while they were there they were meant to take photos of the Americans and the CIA, but somewhere along the line things went really badly and the CIA killed them and then had to kill the rest of the hikers because obviously they didn't know if the rest of the hikers were in on this mission. There's a few reasons that this theory came about. The first is they had very high tech and a lot of camera equipment, which is very weird considering when you're on a hike like this, you definitely want to lighten your load instead of gearing up on all this high-tech camera equipment. It's also believed that 6 out of the 10 films that were taken were missing because only 4 of the 10 films have been found. Semyon was also a little bit of a sketchy character from what I read up. I couldn't find a whole lot of information on this, but a few different sources said the same thing, so I thought that I would mention this anyway, either if I'm so off par with this. So first of all, he was single and he was also an instructor at a remote ski center, which isn't the sketchy part of him. He was also a veteran with years of experience and fought for the NKVD. He also had this really bizarre tattoo, which literally no one knows what it translates to in any language. Archives from the Polytechnic Institute also show that he was or worked in Moscow as a lab assistant in a very, very top secret scientific facility which was unnamed. Apparently Yuri also may have worked in this place that was really sketchy, where a massive nuclear disaster occurred in 1957. And honestly, if this is true, it just can't be a coincidence that these two guys are on the same expedition together. But despite how sketchy these two guys are, I think this theory is pretty far-fetched because, one, why would they have this meeting in the middle of these mountains that they have to hike to? That makes absolutely no sense. Also, it doesn't make sense that there was no injuries and 6 of them died of hypothermia and the rest of them died from like pressure on their bodies that a human couldn't have made. So moving on to one of the more realistic theories, it could be possible that this was caused by an avalanche. So these were all very, very experienced hikers, so it makes absolutely no sense that they would leave their campsite in a hurry and have to actually tear out from the inside of their tent to get out. An avalanche is a very, very quick thing, so it's possible they felt it, they saw it coming. Well, they probably couldn't have seen it coming because they were inside, or maybe the 2 guys that were outside saw it coming and yelled in, and because it's so quick they didn't have any time to grab any of their stuff inside, any of their belongings, any of the things they need. They just scrambled to get out and run away from this avalanche. This could explain why they got out of the tent from the inside out. It could also explain the pressure to the 3 bodies that killed them and couldn't have been a human. But the biggest thing that basically proves this theory is not true is that there was no evidence of an avalanche, and an avalanche is a huge thing. There would have been some sort of evidence, debris, or the tent would have been covered or the tent would have been crushed to prove that there was an avalanche, but there was nothing. It also doesn't explain why the 3 people who were the most likely to die from the avalanche itself were the furthest away from the campsite, considering it seemed like they were trying to get out to run away. It also doesn't explain why their footprints didn't look like they were in a hurry, it just looked like they were walking. And it also doesn't explain why 3 of them were going back to the campsite, especially considering the 3 that were going back to the campsite don't seem like they lived as long as the 3 who died from the pressure. Also, to add to this, these people are experienced hikers, which I've mentioned so many times in this video. Doesn't make sense that they would set up camp anywhere near where an avalanche could occur. They're smarter than that. They know where to stop. They know where they can stop. So it really doesn't make sense to me that an avalanche caused this. So the last theory that I'm going to talk about, and this is definitely the most likely scenario and was actually thought of by a YouTuber. So I'm going to link the video down below so that you guys can see that and see their take on the Dyatlov Pass incident. But basically in a few of the photos you can see an exhaust pipe which was set up by Dyatlov. Basically the group kind of cooked all their meals inside their tent, so this exhaust pipe was to let all of the fumes and everything else outside of the tent so that it didn't burn down and didn't catch fire. And then once they were done cooking, it seems as though they would most likely remove the exhaust pipe. It does seem like maybe they had trouble with this exhaust pipe and the method that they were using before as well, because there's a photo which I'll put on the screen of the guy in a jacket that has clearly been burnt, or I mean, I don't know what else it could be if it wasn't burnt. It seems maybe they did have a few problems with this method. So anyway, they had it this time on the day that they died. They had the exhaust up, they cooked, and when they finished cooking, they took the exhaust pipe off, and it's possible that somehow there were a few embers on the stove and that these got reignited and then caused the tent to fill up with smoke. No fire, just smoke, but obviously if your tent was filling up with smoke, you would freak out, especially if they had an incident before where things had gone wrong and the jacket had been burnt. So they frantically tried to get out. They cut their way out of the tent, which explains that. And they had to leave quickly, of course, so they didn't grab any of their belongings, their shoes, their socks, their clothes to keep them warm. It explains why they went towards the woods to try and find shelter, because they had just totally messed up their only shelter and they were in freezing temperature, and that was a problem. It would also explain why those guys were trying to climb the trees, maybe so they could look back towards the campsite, see if the smoke had gone down or if it had set on fire, if it was safe to go back and get their belongings because they would have been freezing. And maybe they did realize that it was okay and it was safe to go back to the tent, and that's why the three, including Dyatlov, were walking, or seemed as though they were walking back to the tent. Maybe they were trying to get their belongings. That's kind of iffy to me, because why were they so many hundreds of meters apart from each other? It also explains the three that died around their little snow den, because maybe they came out and caused some sort of small avalanche and then they died from the small avalanche, because they did set up their shelter right near a ravine, or inside a ravine, I think. This would also explain why there was no damage to the tent, like it wasn't burnt down or anything, because it was just smoke, it wasn't a fire. There also seemed like there had been food left behind, so this again makes sense. It seems like maybe they were eating when they noticed the smoke, so they left all their food behind. It also keeps in time with how I said that it was around 6 to 7 p.m. they were eating, and that is the last known movements. The tongue as well, I feel like could be explained by maybe scavengers came and got it or something like that, or it did have to do with the decomposition process. One thing to me that doesn't make sense with this theory is the footsteps. As I said, it didn't look like they were running from the tent, which I feel like if they thought that their tent was setting on fire, they would want to run away from that. Other than that, this theory makes complete sense, which is why I think it's so great that YouTubers are talking about these topics and making videos on these topics, because there are some really smart people and some really great minds out there that can piece these together, maybe one by one, or, you know, help push the case towards getting an answer or an ending, or becoming from unsolved to solved. So that does bring us to the end of today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. This was such a bizarre case. Literally blows my mind to this day, and even though I find that last theory so likely, the case just still trips me up, because it is honestly so strange. Like, there are so many weird aspects to this case that I just can't wrap my head around. But as always, I would love for you guys to leave your opinions in the comments, your thoughts on what happened. Maybe if you have any other theories that I didn't mention in this video, or a theory of your own. Also, if I missed any information that you guys know about, feel free to comment that down below so everyone else can see it, because this is a huge case, so of course I'm bound to miss something here or there. And anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to give it a thumbs up for me. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can see more of these, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye!